The sound of hooves thundered past the window. But Franklin Ramsey barely noticed as he pushed open the heavy oak door to his study, eager for the quiet sanctuary of his books after 3 days of riding the northern range of his sprawling cattle operation. What stopped him dead in his tracks was not the familiar scent of leather and aged paper, but the sight of a young woman curled in his favorite chair by the fireplace, completely absorbed in a thick volume of Shakespeare's collected works, her dark hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. She looked up at the sound of his boots on the hardwood floor, and Franklin found himself staring into the most striking green eyes he had ever seen. She closed the book carefully, marking her place with a ribbon bookmark, and stood with natural grace despite the obvious embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," she said, her voice steady despite the flush spreading across her face. "Your housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, said you wouldn't be back until tomorrow, and when I mentioned how much I missed reading, she brought me here. I should have waited for your permission." Franklin removed his dusty hat, trying to make sense of the situation while simultaneously trying not to stare at how the late afternoon sun created a halo effect around her figure. "I finished early," he managed, his voice rougher than intended after days of shouting orders over wind and cattle. "And you are Adelaide Kensington," she replied, straightening her simple blue dress. "I arrived in Watsonville 3 days ago on the afternoon stage. I'm the new school teacher, though the term doesn't start for another 2 weeks. Mrs. Chen has been kind enough to let me board here until the teacher's cottage can be properly prepared." Understanding dawned on Franklin. He had been the one to approve the funds for hiring a teacher, part of his ongoing effort to bring civilization to this corner of California's Central Coast. But he had been out on the range when she arrived, and Mrs. Chen had taken it upon herself to house the young woman in one of the many guest rooms of his sprawling ranch house. "Shakespeare?" he asked, gesturing to the book she still held. Adelaide glanced down at it, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "The Tempest. I've always been drawn to stories about people finding themselves in unfamiliar places, discovering they are stronger than they knew." Franklin crossed to the sideboard and poured himself a glass of water from the pitcher there, aware of the dust coating his clothes and the 3-day growth of beard on his face. He must look like a roughneck compared to this obviously educated woman. "You're a long way from home, Miss Kensington." "Where did you come from?" "Boston," she replied, setting the book carefully back on the shelf where she had found it. "And please, it's Adelaide. Miss Kensington sounds so formal. Then you should call me Franklin." He took a long drink, watching her over the rim of his glass. "Boston to Watsonville is quite a journey. What brought you west?" Adelaide moved toward the window, gazing out at the rolling hills dotted with cattle. "The same thing that brings most people west, I suppose. A fresh start, and the opportunity to do meaningful work. The children here deserve an education just as much as those in Boston." There was something in the way she said it, a finality that suggested she was running from something as much as running toward something new. Franklin recognized the sentiment because it echoed his own journey. He had built this ranch from nothing over the past 8 years, pouring all his energy into creating something lasting after losing everything he had known in the war. "Well then, Adelaide, you're welcome to use the library whenever you like," Franklin said, surprising himself with the offer. He was generally a private man, protective of his space, but something about her presence felt right, as if the books had been waiting for someone who would appreciate them as much as he did. "That's very generous," Adelaide said, her smile widening. "I promise not to disturb your things." "You weren't disturbing anything," Franklin assured her. "In fact, it's nice to see someone else enjoy them. I spent a small fortune having these books shipped from San Francisco, seemed a waste for only one person to read them. Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Chen's appearance in the doorway. The older Chinese woman had been Franklin's housekeeper since he first built the main house 5 years ago, and she ran the household with quiet efficiency. "Mr. Ramsey, you are back early. I will prepare bath water and fresh clothes. Dinner in 2 hours." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen," Franklin said, then turned back to Adelaide. "I should clean up. Please make yourself at home." As Franklin headed upstairs to wash away the grime of the trail, he found his thoughts lingering on the unexpected guest in his library. Adelaide Kensington was unlike any woman he had met in Watsonville. Most of the women in town were ranchers' wives or daughters, hardened by the demanding life of frontier California. Adelaide had a refinement that spoke of a different upbringing, yet she had chosen to come here, to this rough country town, to teach children who might never use half of what she taught them. An hour later, cleaned and dressed in fresh clothes, Franklin descended the stairs to find Adelaide still in the library, though she had moved to the window seat and was writing in a leather-bound journal. She looked up as he entered, and he saw approval in her eyes as she took in his transformed appearance. "Much better," she said with a slight smile, "though I'm sure the cattle don't mind the dust." "The cattle don't mind much of anything as long as they have grass and water," Franklin replied, taking a seat in the chair she had occupied earlier. "Tell me more about yourself, Adelaide. What made you decide to become a teacher?" Adelaide set down her pen, her expression becoming more thoughtful. "My mother was a teacher before she married. She taught me to read when I was very young, and I fell in love with learning. When I had the opportunity to attend the normal school in Boston, I took it. Teaching seemed like the best way to share that love with others. And your family supported this decision to come west." A shadow passed over Adelaide's face. "My parents died of influenza 2 winters ago. I have a brother, but he has his own family to care for. Coming to California gave me the chance to be independent, to build my own life." Franklin felt a pang of sympathy. He understood loss all too well. "I'm sorry for your loss. I lost my parents as well, though it was during the war. My father and older brother both died at Gettysburg." "I'm sorry," Adelaide said softly. "The war took so much from so many people." "It did," Franklin agreed. "But we go on, we build new things, create new lives." "Like your ranch," Adelaide observed. "Mrs. Chen told me you started with nothing but determination and a piece of land." Franklin laughed, a short, self-deprecating sound. "It wasn't quite nothing. I had some money saved and I bought the land cheap because no one else wanted it. Took years to build it into something profitable." "But you did it," Adelaide said. "That takes remarkable dedication." "Or remarkable stubborn pride," Franklin countered. "Some days I'm not sure which." Their conversation was interrupted by the dinner bell, and Franklin offered Adelaide his arm to escort her to the dining room. The gesture felt natural, comfortable, as if they had known each other far longer than a single afternoon. Over dinner, Mrs. Chen served a hearty meal of roasted chicken, fresh vegetables from the ranch garden, and warm bread. Franklin found himself talking more than he usually did, drawn out by Adelaide's genuine interest in the ranch and the surrounding area. She asked intelligent questions about cattle ranching, water rights, and the challenges of managing such a large operation. "You have over 2,000 head of cattle," Adelaide asked, her eyes widening. "How do you possibly keep track of them all?" "Carefully," Franklin said with a smile. "And with good men working for me. I have 20 ranch hands, most of them experienced cowboys who know their business. During Roundup, we hire additional help. It's organized chaos, but it works." "I'd love to see it sometime," Adelaide said. "I've never seen a real cattle roundup." The fall roundup is next month, Franklin offered. If you're interested, I could show you some of the operation. Nothing too dangerous, just enough to give you an idea of what we do. Adelaide's face lit up with enthusiasm. I would like that very much. After dinner, Adelaide excused herself to her room, pleading fatigue from the journey and the day's excitement. Franklin returned to the library, but found himself unable to concentrate on the ledgers he needed to review. His mind kept returning to green eyes and an infectious smile, to the way Adelaide had looked sitting in his chair, completely at home among his books. The next 2 weeks passed in a pleasant rhythm. Franklin attended to ranch business during the day, while Adelaide explored Watsonville and prepared for the start of the school term. In the evenings, they often found themselves in the library together, reading in companionable silence, or discussing everything from philosophy to politics to the future of California. Franklin learned that Adelaide had strong opinions on women's suffrage, believed education was the key to social progress, and could quote Emerson and Thoreau from memory. Adelaide discovered that Franklin was far more educated than his rough cowboy exterior suggested, that he had attended university for 2 years before the war interrupted his studies, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. "You're not what I expected when they told me I would be boarding at a cattle rancher's home," Adelaide admitted one evening as they sat by the fireplace, the first cool touch of autumn in the air. "What did you expect?" Franklin asked, looking up from the book of poetry he had been reading. "Someone rougher, I suppose, less refined. Not someone who quotes Byron and keeps a library that rivals any I've seen in Boston." Franklin closed his book. "The West isn't as uncivilized as people back east think. We have culture here, education. It just looks different than it does in Boston." "I'm beginning to see that," Adelaide said. "Everyone I've met in Watsonville has been welcoming and kind. The parents are eager for their children to have a proper education. Some of them have even offered to help repair the schoolhouse." "That's because they know the value of what you're offering," Franklin said. "Most of these folks came west for the same reason you did, for opportunity and a fresh start. They want their children to have even more opportunities than they had." Adelaide studied him in the firelight, her expression serious. "You could have stayed in Boston or New York, used your education to become a lawyer or a businessman. Why did you choose to come here and become a rancher?" Franklin was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "After the war, I couldn't go back to the way things were. Too much had changed, and I had changed most of all. I needed something physical, something real. Building this ranch from the ground up gave me a purpose when I felt lost. Every fence post, every head of cattle, every acre of land represents something I created with my own hands and my own decisions. It's mine in a way nothing else has ever been." "I think I understand," Adelaide said softly. "Teaching feels that way to me. Every child who learns to read, who discovers a love of learning, represents something I helped create. It's legacy of a different kind." "Exactly," Franklin agreed, feeling a connection deepen between them. "Different paths, same destination. We're both trying to build something meaningful." The next day, Franklin took Adelaide into town to see the schoolhouse. The small wooden building stood at the edge of Watsonville's Main Street, painted white but showing signs of neglect. Adelaide walked through the single large room, taking note of the dusty desks, the cracked chalkboard, and the water-stained textbooks stacked in the corner. "It needs work," she said, her voice determined rather than discouraged. "But I've worked with less." "We'll get it fixed up," Franklin assured her. "I'll send some of my men over tomorrow to do repairs. New chalkboard, fresh paint, whatever you need." Adelaide turned to him, gratitude shining in her eyes. You're doing so much already, letting me stay at your home. I can't ask for more. You're not asking. I'm offering. Franklin moved closer, drawn by an impulse he didn't quite understand. Adelaide, having you at the ranch these past weeks has been the best thing that's happened to me in a long time. Helping you succeed here is the least I can do. Color rose in Adelaide's cheeks, but she didn't look away. Franklin, I need to tell you something. I didn't just come west for opportunity. I was engaged to be married in Boston to a man my brother chose for me. He was cruel and controlling, and I knew if I married him, I would lose myself completely. So I broke the engagement and applied for teaching positions as far away as I could. Coming here was an escape as much as it was a new beginning. Franklin felt anger rise at the thought of someone mistreating Adelaide, but he kept his voice calm. You did the right thing. No one should be trapped in a marriage with someone who doesn't respect them. I wanted you to know the truth, Adelaide said. You've been so honest with me, and I owe you the same courtesy. Thank you for trusting me with that, Franklin said. And Adelaide, whatever brought you here, I'm grateful for it. Their eyes met and held, and Franklin felt the air between them charged with possibility. He wanted to kiss her, wanted to pull her close and promise that he would never let anyone hurt her again. But it was too soon, too fast. Instead, he stepped back and offered his arm. Come on, let's get measurements for the repairs. I want this schoolhouse to be the finest in the county. Over the next week, Franklin's ranch hands transformed the schoolhouse. They replaced broken windows, repaired the roof, installed a new chalkboard, and built additional bookshelves. Adelaide supervised the work, her enthusiasm infectious. The townspeople donated supplies, textbooks, and even a globe that had been gathering dust in someone's attic. Franklin found himself making excuses to check on the progress, just to catch glimpses of Adelaide. She had a way of lighting up when she talked about her plans for the school, about the curriculum she wanted to implement, and the difference she hoped to make. Her passion for teaching reminded him of his own passion for the ranch, that drive to create something meaningful and lasting. The night before the school term was set to begin, Franklin found Adelaide in the library, looking nervous for the first time since he had met her. Having second thoughts, he asked gently. Terrified thoughts, Adelaide admitted. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail them? Franklin sat beside her on the window seat. You won't fail. You care too much and you're too good at what you do. How do you know? You've never seen me teach. I've seen how you talk about teaching. I've seen the care you put into preparing the schoolhouse. I've seen how the children look at you when we pass them in town. They're excited to learn from you, Adelaide. That's half the battle right there. Adelaide leaned against him and Franklin put his arm around her shoulders, the gesture feeling natural and right. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. For giving me a place to stay, for helping with the school, for believing in me. Always, Franklin promised, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The first day of school arrived with perfect September weather, cool and clear. Franklin rode into town to watch Adelaide ring the school bell for the first time. Children came running from all directions, some barefoot, some in their Sunday best, all eager to start the new term. Adelaide stood on the schoolhouse steps, her hair neatly pinned, her dress crisp and professional, and welcomed each child by name. Franklin watched from across the street, pride swelling in his chest. She had memorized all their names from the enrollment list, had learned something about each family so she could connect with the children personally. As the last student entered and Adelaide followed them inside, Franklin caught her eye and gave her an encouraging nod. Her answering smile lit up her entire face. That evening, Adelaide practically danced into the ranch house, bubbling with stories about her first day. Franklin listened as she described each student, their personalities and quirks, the lessons she had taught, the progress they had already made. And little Emma Patterson, she's only 6, but she already knows her letters, Adelaide said, her words tumbling over each other in her excitement. And Thomas Richardson, he's 12 and so bright, Franklin. He soaks up everything like a sponge. With proper education, he could go to university someday. You're going to change their lives, Franklin said, infected by her enthusiasm. I'm going to try, Adelaide said. Oh, Franklin, it was everything I hoped it would be and more. Thank you for making this possible. Unable to resist any longer, Franklin pulled her into his arms and kissed her. Adelaide stiffened in surprise for just a moment before melting against him, her arms winding around his neck. The kiss was sweet and tender, full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Franklin rested his forehead against Adelaide's. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. I've wanted you to, Adelaide replied softly. I was beginning to think you never would, Franklin laughed. I was trying to be a gentleman to give you time to settle in without pressure. Well, I'm settled now, Adelaide said, her eyes sparkling. And Franklin, I need you to know something. What I feel for you, it's nothing like what I felt in Boston. You make me feel safe and cherished and excited all at once. You see me for who I really am, not who you want me to be. Because who you really are is extraordinary, Franklin said, cupping her face in his hands. You're brilliant and passionate and brave. You left everything you knew to come here and make a difference. How could I not fall in love with you? Adelaide's breath caught. You love me, completely, Franklin confirmed. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Then you should know that I love you too, Adelaide said, her voice trembling with emotion. I never believed in love at first sight until I looked up and saw you standing in the library doorway. You've shown me what partnership should look like, what respect and mutual admiration feel like. I love you, Franklin Ramsey. They sealed the declaration with another kiss, this one deeper and more passionate. When they finally parted, both flushed and disheveled, Franklin couldn't stop smiling. Will you marry me, Adelaide? He asked. I know it's sudden, and if you want to wait, I'll understand. But I can't imagine my life without you in it now. Adelaide didn't hesitate. Yes, I'll marry you. I don't need time to think about it. You're what I was running toward when I came west, even if I didn't know it then. They decided to wait until the Christmas break to get married, wanting to give Adelaide time to establish herself as the teacher before adding the complication of a wedding. The wait also gave them time to truly get to know each other, to move from the passionate intensity of new love into something deeper and more enduring. Franklin had never been happier. He threw himself into his work with renewed energy, already thinking about the future he would build with Adelaide. He wanted to expand the house, add more rooms for the children they would have. He wanted to create a legacy that would last generations. Adelaide flourished as a teacher. The children adored her, and even the most reluctant students found themselves drawn into her lessons. She made learning an adventure, connecting book knowledge to the practical realities of ranch life. When teaching mathematics, she used examples from cattle ranching and farming. When teaching geography, she related it to the journey the children's parents had made to reach California. In October, Franklin took Adelaide to see the fall roundup, as he had promised. They rode out early in the morning, Adelaide seated on a gentle mare Franklin had chosen specifically for her. The sight of hundreds of cattle being herded across the Golden Hills took Adelaide's breath away. It's magnificent, she said, watching the cowboys work in perfect coordination, their movements practiced and efficient. Franklin pointed out different aspects of the operation, explaining how they separated the cattle for branding, how they identified which animals were ready for market, how they managed the logistics of moving such a large herd. Adelaide listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was really trying to understand this crucial part of Franklin's life. During a break in the work, Franklin introduced Adelaide to his men. The cowboys were respectful but curious, clearly wondering about the refined Eastern lady who had captured their boss's heart. Adelaide charmed them all, asking about their work and listening with real interest to their stories. "She's a keeper, boss," his foreman, Miguel Santos, said quietly. "She's got grit under all that refinement." Franklin agreed completely. Adelaide had proven herself adaptable and resilient, throwing herself into her new life with enthusiasm while maintaining her core values and beliefs. She was exactly the kind of partner he needed, someone who could appreciate his world while bringing her own strengths and perspectives to it. As November arrived, bringing cooler weather and preparations for winter, Franklin and Adelaide began planning their wedding in earnest. They decided to keep it simple, a ceremony in the parlor of the ranch house with Reverend Matthews officiating and the household staff as witnesses. Adelaide wanted her students and their families to attend the reception, which would be held in the schoolhouse. "Are you sure?" Franklin asked, surprised by the unusual request. "We could have the reception here at the ranch, more room and better facilities." "The school brought us together," Adelaide explained. "If you hadn't approved the funding for a teacher, I never would have come to Watsonville. And the people of this town have welcomed me with such warmth. I want to celebrate our marriage with them, in the place that represents our shared commitment to this community." Franklin pulled her close, marveling once again at her generous heart. "Then the schoolhouse it is. We'll make it a celebration they'll remember for years." The week before the wedding, Adelaide moved out of the ranch house and into the now completed teacher's cottage adjacent to the school. Franklin hated the separation, but Adelaide insisted on propriety. "We've already pushed the boundaries enough," she said, though her reluctance to leave was obvious. "I won't give the gossips anything to talk about. Besides, it's only a few days." Those days felt like an eternity to Franklin. He had grown so accustomed to Adelaide's presence, to their evening conversations in the library, to the sound of her voice and her laughter filling the house. But he respected her wishes and threw himself into final wedding preparations. Mrs. Chen decorated the parlor with evergreen boughs and white ribbons, transforming the masculine space into something festive and romantic. The ranch hands helped prepare the schoolhouse for the reception, setting up tables and chairs borrowed from the church. The women of Watsonville prepared food, each family contributing their specialty dishes. The morning of the wedding dawned cold and clear, with frost sparkling on the grass. Franklin stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie for the 10th time, nervous in a way he hadn't been since before his first cattle drive. "You look fine, Mr. Ramsey," Mrs. Chen assured him. "Miss Adelaide will be very happy." Franklin hoped so. He wanted to give Adelaide everything she deserved to make her as happy as she made him. The ceremony was set for noon, and as the hour approached, Franklin took his place in the parlor, Reverend Matthews beside him. The door opened, and Adelaide entered on Miguel's arm. Franklin had asked his foreman to give away the bride, and Miguel had accepted the honor with obvious pleasure. But Franklin barely noticed Miguel. His entire focus was on Adelaide, who looked radiant in a simple white dress she had sewn herself, her dark hair crowned with a wreath of late-blooming roses from Mrs. Chen's garden. Adelaide's eyes found his across the room, and her smile was so full of love and joy that Franklin felt his throat tighten with emotion. This amazing, brilliant, courageous woman had chosen him, had agreed to build a life with him in this rough frontier country. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Franklin made his vows with a steady voice, promising to love, honor, and cherish Adelaide for the rest of his life. Adelaide's voice trembled slightly as she made her own promises, but her eyes never left his, shining with unshed tears of happiness. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Matthews declared. "Franklin, you may kiss your bride." Franklin needed no second invitation. He pulled Adelaide into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, much to the delight of the small group of witnesses who applauded and cheered. When they finally broke apart, both laughing, Franklin whispered in Adelaide's ear, "I love you, Mrs. Ramsey." "I love you too, Mr. Ramsey," Adelaide replied, her smile brilliant. The reception at the schoolhouse was a joyous affair. The entire town turned out, bringing gifts and well wishes. Adelaide's students had made decorations, strings of paper flowers and painted signs declaring congratulations. The food was plentiful and delicious, and someone had brought a fiddle, leading to impromptu dancing. Franklin watched Adelaide move through the crowd, accepting congratulations and hugs from her students and their parents. She belonged here, he realized. In just a few short months, she had become an integral part of this community, beloved and respected. As the sun began to set, Franklin and Adelaide slipped away from the celebration, riding back to the ranch house that was now truly their home. Mrs. Chen had thoughtfully made herself scarce, leaving them alone for their first night as husband and wife. "Happy?" Franklin asked as they stood together on the porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Adelaide replied, leaning against him. "Franklin, I spent so much of my life doing what was expected, following the path others laid out for me. Coming west was the first truly brave thing I ever did, and it led me to you, to this life. I wouldn't change a single thing." Franklin turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I spent years building this ranch, thinking land and cattle were what would make me happy. But none of it meant anything until you walked into my library. You're my home, Adelaide. You're what I was building toward all along, even if I didn't know it." Their kiss was tender and sweet, full of promise for the future they would build together. Inside the house, the fire Mrs. Chen had laid crackled warmly, welcoming them home. The winter passed in quiet contentment. Adelaide continued teaching, her students making remarkable progress under her guidance. Franklin managed the ranch, but found himself organizing his work so he could spend more time at home with his wife. They fell into comfortable routines, morning coffee together before Adelaide left for school, evening conversations in the library, quiet Sundays spent planning for the future. In March, Adelaide told Franklin she was expecting their first child. He had never seen her so nervous, as if she feared his reaction. "I know we didn't plan for this so soon," she said, twisting her hands together. "And I'll need to stop teaching before too long, which means finding a replacement, and I know that will be difficult." Franklin silenced her worried rambling with a kiss. "Adelaide, this is wonderful news. A child, our child. I couldn't be happier." Relief flooded Adelaide's face. "Truly, you're not disappointed. No, never. Terrified, maybe, but in a good way. We're going to be parents, Adelaide." "That's incredible." They decided Adelaide would teach through the end of the school term in June, then take time to prepare for the baby's arrival in October. Franklin immediately began work on a nursery, converting the room next to their bedroom into a bright, cheerful space for their child. As Adelaide's pregnancy progressed, Franklin found himself overwhelmed with protective instincts. He worried when she seemed tired, fretted over what she ate, drove her to distraction with his constant concern. "Franklin, I'm pregnant, not fragile," Adelaide finally said in exasperation one evening. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'll be fine." I know," Franklin said, running his hands through his hair. "I just want everything to be perfect for you for the baby." Adelaide's expression softened. "Everything is already perfect because we're facing it together. That's all I need." The school term ended with a celebration. Adelaide's students had made remarkable progress, and several of the older children were now reading at levels far beyond their years. The town council had already hired a replacement teacher for the fall, a young man fresh out of normal school in Sacramento, but everyone knew Adelaide's impact would be felt for years to come. Summer passed in peaceful preparation. Franklin reduced his workload, letting Miguel handle more of the day-to-day ranch operations so he could stay close to Adelaide. They spent long afternoons on the porch, Adelaide reading while Franklin whittled small toys for the baby. "Boy or girl?" Adelaide asked one day, watching Franklin carve a small horse. "Healthy," Franklin replied. "That's all that matters, though I wouldn't mind a daughter with your green eyes and stubborn determination." "Or a son with your kindness and strength," Adelaide countered. "Or both," Franklin said with a grin. Eventually, in October, as the leaves turned gold and the first hints of winter appeared in the air, Adelaide went into labor. Franklin sent for the doctor and tried to remain calm, but his hands shook as he paced the hallway outside their bedroom. Mrs. Chen kept him supplied with coffee and reassurance, but hours passed with agonizing slowness. Finally, as dawn broke over the ranch, the doctor emerged with a tired but happy smile. "Congratulations, Franklin. You have a son." Franklin rushed into the room to find Adelaide propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle. She looked up as he entered, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Franklin, meet your son," she said softly. Franklin approached almost reverently, hardly daring to breathe as he looked down at the tiny face. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making small, snuffling noises that Franklin found utterly endearing. "He's perfect," Franklin whispered, carefully touching one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers curled around his, gripping with surprising strength. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Adelaide asked. Franklin had been thinking about this for months. "What about Thomas after your father, and James for my brother?" Adelaide's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Thomas James Ramsey. It's perfect. He would have loved that." Franklin sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Adelaide, both of them staring in wonder at their son. This tiny person represented everything they had built together, all the love and hope and promise of their future. "Thank you," Franklin said, kissing Adelaide's temple, "for coming to Watsonville, for taking a chance on me, for giving me this family. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible." "We made this together," Adelaide replied, leaning against him. "Everything we have, we built as partners. That's what makes it so special." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Thomas was a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs, and Franklin and Adelaide took turns walking him through the night when he fussed. Despite the sleepless nights, Franklin had never been happier. Watching Adelaide with their son, seeing the love and tenderness in her eyes as she nursed him or sang soft lullabies, filled Franklin with such profound gratitude and love that sometimes he could hardly speak. Adelaide proved to be a natural mother, patient and nurturing but also practical. She established routines that helped Thomas settle, read parenting books that Franklin brought back from San Francisco, and adjusted to motherhood with the same determination she had brought to teaching. As winter settled over the ranch, the family fell into comfortable rhythms. Franklin worked during the day, though he made a point of coming home for the midday meal so he could spend time with Adelaide and Thomas. Evenings were family time, with all three of them in the library, Adelaide reading aloud while Franklin held Thomas, who seemed to find his father's deep voice soothing. In the spring, when Thomas was 6 months old and Adelaide had recovered her strength, they began discussing the future in earnest. "I want to return to teaching eventually," Adelaide said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Thomas attempt to crawl on a blanket spread on the grass. "Not full-time, perhaps, but I miss it. I miss the children and the sense of purpose it gave me." "Then we'll make it work," Franklin assured her. "Mrs. Chen adores Thomas and would be happy to watch him a few days a week, or we could hire additional help." "You wouldn't mind?" Adelaide asked. "Some men would insist their wives stay home." Franklin took her hand. "Adelaide, I fell in love with your passion for teaching. I would never ask you to give up something so important to you. We'll figure it out together the way we always do." Adelaide squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, Franklin Ramsey." "You walked into my library and changed my entire world," Franklin replied simply. That fall, Adelaide began teaching again, working with small groups of students who needed extra help 3 afternoons a week. Mrs. Chen looked after Thomas during these times, and Franklin rearranged his schedule to be home when Adelaide returned, eager to hear about her day and help with Thomas. The arrangement worked beautifully. Adelaide glowed with the satisfaction of using her skills and knowledge, while Thomas thrived under the attention of multiple loving adults. Franklin watched his family grow and flourish, marveling at how much his life had changed in just 2 years. As Thomas grew from baby to toddler, his personality emerged. He was curious and energetic, fascinated by everything from the horses in the corral to the books in the library. Adelaide read to him constantly, and Franklin took him on gentle rides around the ranch, introducing him to the land that would someday be his heritage. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, Franklin gave Adelaide a gift that made her cry. He had commissioned a painting of the library, showing the chair where he had first found her, the book of Shakespeare still open on the arm. "So we never forget where it all started," Franklin said as Adelaide stared at the painting through tears. "As if I could ever forget," Adelaide replied, throwing her arms around his neck. "That moment changed everything. I walked into a room looking for an escape, and instead I found my future." "Our future," Franklin corrected. "Everything we have, we built together." That night, after Thomas was tucked into bed, Adelaide had news of her own. "We're going to need to make that nursery bigger," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Or perhaps prepare another room." Understanding dawned, and Franklin's whoop of joy echoed through the house. Their second child, a daughter with Adelaide's green eyes and Franklin's dark hair, arrived the following summer. They named her Margaret Rose, and Thomas proved to be a devoted big brother, constantly wanting to help with the baby. The years flowed by in a river of joy and hard work. Franklin expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land and increasing the herd. Adelaide balanced teaching and motherhood, finding fulfillment in both roles. Their family grew again with the arrival of another son, Henry, when Margaret was 3. As the children grew, the ranch house filled with laughter and love. Thomas showed an early aptitude for ranching, following Franklin around and asking endless questions about cattle and horses. Margaret inherited her mother's love of learning, devouring books almost as fast as Adelaide could provide them. Henry was the wild card, equally comfortable in the saddle or with his nose in a book, bridging his siblings' interests. Franklin often found himself pausing in his work to simply appreciate his life. The lonely man who had poured all his energy into building a ranch had become a husband and father, surrounded by love and laughter. And it had all started with a woman reading in his library. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Franklin and Adelaide stood on the porch together, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, now 9, was teaching 6-year-old Margaret how to rope a fence post, while 3-year-old Henry provided enthusiastic but unhelpful commentary. "Do you ever regret it?" Franklin asked quietly. "Leaving Boston, giving up the life you knew?" Adelaide looked at him in surprise. "Regret? Franklin, leaving Boston was the best decision I ever made. Every single day, I wake up grateful for the courage that brought me here to you, to this life we've built. Even when the children are driving you to distraction," Franklin teased. "Especially then," Adelaide replied with a laugh. "They're loud and messy and exhausting, and I wouldn't trade a single moment with them. They're ours, Franklin. They're the best parts of both of us." Franklin pulled her close, watching Thomas finally manage to loop the rope over the post while Margaret cheered. "I love you, Adelaide. More now than the day we married, if that's even possible." "It's possible," Adelaide assured him, "because love isn't static. It grows and changes and deepens with every shared experience, every challenge overcome together. The man I married 10 years ago was wonderful, but the man you've become, the father and partner and friend, is even more extraordinary." Their kiss was interrupted by Henry crashing into their legs, demanding to be picked up. Franklin scooped up his youngest son while Adelaide called the older children for dinner. As the family trooped inside, talking over each other in their eagerness to share the day's adventures, Franklin felt his heart overflow with contentment. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of a growing family. Thomas learned to manage cattle under Franklin's patient tutelage. Margaret excelled in school and began helping Adelaide with her tutoring students. Henry proved to have a gift with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animals. When Thomas turned 15, Franklin began seriously preparing him to eventually take over the ranch. They spent long hours discussing herd management, financial planning, and the responsibilities of employing good people. Adelaide watched father and son grow closer through this shared work, their bond strengthening with each passing year. Margaret, at 12, announced her intention to become a teacher like her mother. Adelaide worked with her daughter on lesson planning and teaching methods, sharing the knowledge she had accumulated over years of experience. Franklin built onto the schoolhouse to create a small office where Adelaide and Margaret could work together. Henry, at 9, remained something of an enigma, talented at everything he tried but not yet settled on any particular path. Franklin didn't push him, remembering his own meandering journey to finding his purpose. On their 15th anniversary, the town of Watsonville threw a celebration in honor of Franklin and Adelaide. The couple had become pillars of the community, Franklin through his fair dealings and generous support of town improvements, Adelaide through her tireless work in education. 15 years ago, this town hired a teacher, Mayor Henderson said in his toast. What we didn't know was that we were getting so much more. Adelaide Ramsey brought not just learning to our children, but inspiration. And Franklin, your partnership with your wife, your support of her work and her dreams has set an example for all of us. To the Ramseys. The crowd raised their glasses, and Franklin met Adelaide's eyes across the room. In them, he saw everything they had built together reflected back at him. Love, family, community, purpose. All of it had grown from a single moment. A woman reading in his library, politely hoping he wouldn't mind the intrusion. That night, as they lay in bed, Franklin voiced something that had been on his mind. "Adelaide, I've been thinking about expanding our educational programs. What if we established a scholarship fund to send deserving students to university? We have the resources, and it would ensure that children like Thomas Richardson get the opportunities they deserve. Adelaide sat up, her eyes bright with enthusiasm even in the dim light. Franklin, that's a wonderful idea. We could set up a board to review applications, perhaps tie it to community service requirements. Oh, this could make such a difference. They stayed up late planning, just as they had stayed up late in those early days discussing philosophy and poetry. The passion was still there, but now it was channeled into building something larger than themselves, a legacy that would outlive them both. The Ramsey Education Fund was established the following year, with the first scholarship going to a brilliant young woman who wanted to study medicine. Over the following years, dozens of students benefited from the fund, going on to become teachers, lawyers, doctors, and engineers. They returned to Watsonville regularly, always stopping by the ranch to thank Franklin and Adelaide for making their dreams possible. As Thomas approached his 18th birthday, Franklin began to step back from daily ranch operations, trusting his son to handle more responsibility. Thomas proved himself more than capable, implementing new techniques and approaches that increased efficiency while maintaining the ranch's reputation for quality. Margaret, now 15, was already teaching younger students under Adelaide's supervision, showing the same natural gift for education that her mother possessed. Henry, at 12, had started a side business breeding and training horses, his exceptional skill attracting buyers from as far away as San Francisco. "We did good," Franklin said to Adelaide one evening as they watched their children working together to prepare dinner, arguing good-naturedly about the best way to season the roast. "We did very good," Adelaide agreed. "They're growing into remarkable adults." "They had a remarkable mother to learn from," Franklin said, kissing her temple. "And a remarkable father," Adelaide countered. "Franklin, everything good in my life traces back to the day I had the audacity to sit in your library without permission." Franklin laughed. "Best intrusion I ever experienced." On Thomas's 18th birthday, Franklin officially made him a partner in the ranch operation. The young man accepted the responsibility with maturity beyond his years, understanding the trust his father was placing in him. "I won't let you down," Thomas promised. "I know you won't," Franklin replied. "You're ready for this, son. More than ready." That same year, Margaret was accepted to the normal school in Sacramento, following in her mother's footsteps. The family made the journey together to help her settle in, Franklin fighting the urge to bundle his daughter back home where she would be safe. But Adelaide reminded him that they had raised Margaret to be independent and capable, and it was time to let her spread her wings. "She'll be fine," Adelaide assured him as they rode back to Watsonville. "She's strong and smart and knows her own mind. She's just like her mother, in other words," Franklin said with a mixture of pride and melancholy. "Exactly," Adelaide replied, "and look how well that turned out." Henry, at 15, was the only child still at home, though he spent most of his time in the stables or out riding. Franklin and Adelaide adjusted to the quieter house, rediscovering the peaceful companionship of their early marriage. They spent evenings in the library again, reading and talking, sometimes falling into comfortable silences that spoke of deep understanding. "You miss it?" Franklin asked one night. When the house was full of chaos and noise, Adelaide considered the question carefully. "I miss certain moments, yes, but I'm also enjoying this phase. We get to focus on each other again, remember who we were before we became parents, and we did our job well. The children are thriving, becoming who they're meant to be. That's all any parent can hope for." "When did you become so wise?" Franklin teased. "I've always been wise," Adelaide retorted with a smile. "You just weren't paying attention." Margaret returned home after completing her education, immediately taking a position at the expanded Watsonville School. She brought fresh ideas and modern teaching methods, complementing her mother's more traditional approach. Mother and daughter worked together seamlessly, their partnership enriching the educational opportunities available to the town's children. Thomas, now 21, announced his engagement to Sarah Mitchell, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. The families had known each other for years, and Franklin approved of the match. Sarah was practical and hardworking, with a genuine love for ranch life. She and Thomas complemented each other perfectly. The wedding was a major event in Watsonville, with half the county in attendance. As Franklin watched Thomas and Sarah exchange vows, he was transported back to his own wedding day, remembering the joy and promise of beginning a life with the person you loved. "Our baby is all grown up," Adelaide whispered, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "He is," Franklin agreed, his own throat tight with emotion. "But he's still our son and always will be." Thomas and Sarah built a house on the ranch property, close enough to the main house for convenience but far enough for privacy. Within a year, they welcomed Franklin and Adelaide's first grandchild, a daughter named Adelaide after her grandmother. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Franklin was overwhelmed by the continuation of legacy. This tiny person represented the future, the ongoing story of the family he and Adelaide had created. "Hello, little one," he whispered to baby Adelaide. "You're going to have the best life. We'll make sure of it." Adelaide Sr. stood beside him, tears streaming down her face as she watched her husband cradle their granddaughter. "We did it, Franklin. We created this beautiful family, this beautiful life." "You did it," Franklin corrected gently. "None of this would exist if you hadn't had the courage to leave Boston and come west, if you hadn't walked into my library that day." "We did it together," Adelaide insisted, as she always had. "Every step of the way together." Henry, now 18, surprised everyone by announcing his intention to attend university to study veterinary medicine. He wanted to combine his love of animals with scientific knowledge to make a real difference in animal care and health. "I'll come back," he promised his parents. "Watsonville is my home, and I want to practice here eventually. But I need to learn everything I can first." Franklin and Adelaide supported his decision completely, proud of their youngest son's ambition and drive. They had raised all three children to pursue their passions and dreams, and it was gratifying to see those lessons bear fruit. As Franklin and Adelaide entered their late 50s, they began to slow down, delegating more responsibilities to the younger generation. Thomas managed the ranch with skill and innovation. Margaret ran the expanded school system with her mother's blessing and occasional guidance. Henry sent regular letters from university, full of excitement about his studies and his plans for the future. "We should travel," Adelaide suggested one evening. "We've spent our entire married life in Watsonville. Don't you want to see something of the world before we're too old?" Franklin considered the idea. The ranch was in capable hands, and they had the resources to take an extended trip. "Where would you want to go?" "Boston," Adelaide said immediately. "I want you to see where I came from, understand that part of my life. And then perhaps San Francisco, maybe even up to Oregon and Washington. I want to see this country we call home." They spent 6 months traveling, visiting Boston, where Adelaide showed Franklin her childhood haunts and the school where she had trained. They met her brother's family, mending fences that had been damaged by her abrupt departure decades earlier. They explored San Francisco's vibrant culture, traveled up the coast to see the majestic forests of the Pacific Northwest. But everywhere they went, they found themselves comparing it to Watsonville, to the life they had built there. By the time they returned home, both were certain they had made the right choices all those years ago. "There's no place like home," Adelaide said as the ranch house came into view, surrounded by the rolling hills she had come to love. "No place," Franklin agreed. "This is where we belong." They were welcomed back with a huge celebration. Thomas and Sarah's family had grown to include 3 children now. Margaret had married a fellow teacher, and they had 2 young daughters. Henry had returned from university and was establishing a veterinary practice in town, already earning a reputation for his skill and compassion with animals. Franklin and Adelaide settled into their role as grandparents and community elders. They attended school events and church socials, hosted family dinners every Sunday, and continued to support education through their scholarship fund. The library where they had first met became a gathering place for the grandchildren, who loved hearing the story of how Grandpa found Grandma reading without permission. "Tell it again," little Adelaide would plead, and Franklin would launch into the familiar tale, embellishing it slightly each time for dramatic effect. "I walked into my library, expecting peace and quiet, and instead I found the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, completely absorbed in Shakespeare." "And what did Grandma say?" the children would chorus, even though they knew the answer. "She said, 'I hope you don't mind the intrusion,'" Franklin would reply. "And I thought, mind, this is the best thing that ever happened to me." On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire town of Watsonville gathered to honor Franklin and Adelaide. The celebration was held at the school, now a sprawling complex of buildings thanks to their generous support over the years. 30 years ago, I came to this town as a stranger," Adelaide said in her speech. "I was running from one life and hoping to find another. What I found was beyond my wildest dreams. I found purpose in teaching, I found community in this town, and I found love in a man who saw me for who I truly was and loved me anyway. Franklin Ramsey, you are my greatest adventure and my safest harbor. Thank you for 30 extraordinary years." Franklin stood to respond, his voice strong despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Adelaide, you walked into my library and into my life, and nothing has been the same since. Every day with you has been a gift. Every challenge we've faced together. Every joy has been magnified because I could share it with you. You are my partner, my best friend, my love. Here's to 30 more years." The crowd erupted in applause, but Franklin only had eyes for Adelaide, whose face glowed with love and happiness. They kissed to more cheers, and Franklin marveled at how lucky he had been, that one chance encounter in a library had led to this rich, full life. As they grew older, Franklin and Adelaide spent more time at home, content with simple pleasures. They read together in the library, worked in the garden Adelaide had cultivated over the years, and spoiled their numerous grandchildren. The ranch thrived under Thomas's management, the school flourished under Margaret's leadership, and Henry's veterinary practice became essential to the entire county. "We did good," Franklin would say regularly, and Adelaide would always agree. On a cool autumn evening, 40 years after that first meeting in the library, Franklin and Adelaide sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their children and grandchildren had just left after the weekly family dinner, and the house still echoed with the laughter and chatter of 3 generations. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" Adelaide asked, her hand in Franklin's. "I remember everything," Franklin replied. "Every moment with you is etched in my memory. "We've had a good life, haven't we?" Adelaide said softly. "The best life," Franklin confirmed. "Better than I ever could have imagined." "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Adelaide said. Echoing those first words she had spoken to him so long ago, Franklin turned to her, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "My darling Adelaide, you could never be an intrusion. You are the story I was meant to live, the love I was meant to find, the life I was meant to have. Every day with you has been a blessing." They kissed as the sun set, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting. The library where it all began stood quiet in the house behind them, still filled with the books that had first brought them together, waiting to inspire new generations with the power of love and the magic of stories. The Ramsey legacy lived on through their children and grandchildren, through the students educated by their scholarship fund, through the thriving town they had helped build. But more than that, it lived on in the story of two people who had taken a chance on love and created something extraordinary. Years later, when their grandchildren told the story to their own children, they would always start the same way. Great-grandfather Franklin walked into his library one day and found great-grandmother Adelaide reading without permission. She said, "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," and he fell in love with her right then and there. And that's how our family began, with books and bravery and a love that lasted forever. And it did last forever, that love between Franklin and Adelaide. Through all the years, all the challenges and triumphs, all the ordinary moments and extraordinary ones, their love remained constant. It grew and deepened, evolved and strengthened, but it never wavered. When Franklin passed away peacefully at the age of 82, surrounded by his family, his last words were for Adelaide. "Thank you for reading in my library that day. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for this beautiful life." Adelaide held his hand, tears streaming down her face but her voice steady. "Thank you for not minding the intrusion. Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for building this life with me. I'll love you forever, Franklin Ramsey." Adelaide lived another 5 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, continuing to support education in Watsonville, and visiting the library every day to sit in the chair where Franklin had first found her. She would read Shakespeare, just as she had that first day, and feel his presence beside her. When she joined Franklin at last, the entire town mourned. But they also celebrated, because Franklin and Adelaide Ramsey had shown them all what true love looked like. They had demonstrated the power of partnership, the importance of shared dreams, and the beauty of building a life together. The library remained in the family home, preserved exactly as it had been, a testament to where it all began. The chair where Adelaide had sat that fateful day wore a small brass plaque that read, "In this chair, Adelaide Kensington read Shakespeare and found her future. May all who sit here find their own story." Generations of Ramseys would grow up hearing the story, understanding that love could be found in unexpected places, that courage and hope could change everything, that two people committed to each other could create something that would outlast them both. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the family with the same care and dedication Franklin had shown. The school system Adelaide had helped build educated hundreds of children, sending them out into the world prepared and confident. The scholarship fund continued to change lives, opening doors that might otherwise have remained closed. But more than any of that, the love story of Franklin and Adelaide lived on. It was told and retold, becoming part of Watsonville's history, a reminder that the most extraordinary things can come from the simplest moments. A woman reading in a library, a man willing to open his heart, a shared love of books leading to a shared life. In the end, Adelaide had been right all those years ago when she chose the Tempest to raid that day. They had both been people in unfamiliar places, discovering they were stronger than they knew. And together, they had created magic that would echo through the ages, a love story for the ages, born in a library in the Wild West, between a rancher and a teacher who dared to dream of more. Their story became legend, but it was a legend built on truth, on real love and real commitment and real partnership. It was a story that proved love could conquer distance and difference, that two people from different worlds could create a new world together, that the right person at the right moment could change everything. And it all began with 7 simple words. I hope you don't mind the intrusion. Franklin hadn't minded at all. He had welcomed it, embraced it, built his entire life around it. Because sometimes the best things in life are the unexpected intrusions, the unplanned moments, the chance encounters that change everything. Adelaide's intrusion into Franklin's library had been the beginning of everything good in both their lives. The moment when 2 separate stories became one beautiful, enduring tale of love.